there are a lot of reasons that shanties would be appealing right now, and they're totally why shanties are my spiritual practice. Apparently no one else has put this together yet. And as the month went on, more and more of these think pieces sort of started to figure out, like, oh, they're a really communal activity. They connect us with people. They tell the stories of being a crew of friends out in the ocean, pulling together and making harmony together. And you get that harmony right in your ears if you're listening on headphones. And during the pandemic, it's really been a loss to musical communities to not be able to have harmony together. So it was really kind of a no-brainer when when shanties caught on in the mainstream. I think it's just been waiting for its moment to happen.
Welcome to Faith and What Resonates, a show that explores the intersection of faith, spirituality, music, and the nature of inspiration. I'm Gail Gallagher, and I'm a professional musician and lifelong seeker. I was raised Catholic and Unitarian Universalist at the same time, and as I grew up sorting my theology, I found my spiritual ground in music and theater. On this show, I interview folks about their faith journeys and the role music plays in their lives as we explore the magic of the things that resonate. On this episode, I interview the foremost sea shanty expert that I know personally anyway, Jacky Decks. This is a wonderful conversation about sea shanties and how they build community, how they can be a source of spiritual grounding, and other points in between. Also, we sing some shanties together. This conversation was recorded on a hot June day with the windows open, so there might be some fun sounds of summer caught in the background of our conversation. That's the indie podcast life, so just roll with it. Anyway, here's our conversation. All right, welcome to another episode of Faith and What Resonates, and today we have my friend Jacky Decks. Hello!
Hey, Gail.
Hey, and you know what, friends? This is my first podcast interview that isn't on Zoom. We're in the same room together. What?
Is that allowed?
It is. The world is opening up, things are happening, it's great. So, Jacky, tell me a little bit about yourself, your faith background, what you do in the world.
Yeah, well, I'm so happy to be here after we've known each other for a couple of years through our Unitarian church. So I'm Unitarian, and I don't identify as Christian, but sort of more of like a spiritual humanist kind of vibe. And I grew up more or less in that tradition. I consider myself really lucky in that way. And I work as a designer. I do some web design and some graphic design. So, just kind of like a cross between creative and nerdery, technical nerdery kind of stuff. I'm one of my spiritual practices is singing sea shanties.
And that is what we're here to talk about today. So yes, you are the foremost sea shanty expert in my life. And I have to know, when did your interest in sea shanties start?
Yeah, so it's kind of been coming on gradually over like kind of my whole life, I think. It really started when my family visited Mystic Seaport out on the East Coast, and my mom picked up an album of sea shanties when we were at the museum there, and we've always been into like visiting historical sites and learning about history by visiting the places. So we saw a shanty group perform when we were there, and my mom picked up the album. And then sometime later, I think I just found it on our CD shelf, and I was listening to it, and I was really hooked. And I was probably about 11 at that time. And, I liked the rhythmic harmony of the songs. And then as I got older and I hit puberty, I kind of realized what some of these songs were singing about. Some of these sea words that they were using, some of these nautical terms, they didn't mean those literally. When they're talking about the ship, they're they're not talking about a ship. They're talking about a woman. And so there was this sort of shock of like, oh my gosh, what are they singing about? This is so inappropriate. But as I got older, it kind of hooked me in, and it worked for me somehow. And then I had some friends who were also into sea shanties from like a separate route of their own, and we would talk about them and just sort of geek out about them, share links to YouTube songs or whatever. And eventually I found out that there are actually groups that get together and meet in bars and sing them for fun, which I had always thought like, oh, this is going to have to be a bucket list item. I'm going to have to like find, the last historical sailing ship and, go there on the right time of year to catch when they're, having a performance. But it turns out that like even in the middle of Flatland, Illinois, there are people meeting up and singing, songs of the sea. And so when I moved to Chicago, there's a really well-established group here, and I got involved with that, and it's really been an anchor, so to speak, for me here in Chicago. It's seen me through the rise and fall of a couple of relationships and transitions in my life, and I've been really thankful to have that base of connection. So it's just really, I guess, been an anchor in my life. I didn't intend to phrase it that way, but it seems appropriate.
I mean, that's a pretty solid way to phrase that for sure. So I have to ask, how has it been with sea shanty suddenly being popular on TikTok?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's been quite a ride. So before in the before times, my coworkers would give me a hard time of like, sing us a shanty at the happy hour this evening, or oh, are you going to the boat this weekend? And they were really just pulling my legs. But then with everybody being locked down during the pandemic, everybody else started to sort of realize how awesome shanties are. And as someone who's been singing shanties for some time now, there was this interesting progression to watch where first all of the like think piece articles were saying like, why are shanties getting so popular right now? What is going on? This is so weird. Isn't the internet bizarre? And I'm sitting there thinking like, well, there are a lot of reasons that shanties would be appealing right now, and they're totally why shanties are my spiritual practice. Apparently no one else has put this together yet. And as the month went on, more and more of these think pieces sort of started to figure out like, oh, they're a really communal activity. They connect us with people. They tell the stories of being a crew of friends out in the ocean, pulling together and making harmony together. And you get that harmony right in your ears if you're listening on headphones. And during the pandemic, it's really been a loss to musical communities to not be able to have harmony together. So it was really kind of a no-brainer when when shanties caught on in the mainstream. I think it's just been waiting for its moment to happen.
That's awesome. And so it was like, instead of, I find when something I love gets popular, I have this like gut like hipster reaction where I'm like, no, I loved it before it was cool, but I love that for you it was like, oh yeah, this is just validating the experience I already had with it, and that is really cool. And I want to hear more about how you connect with sea shanties and that sense of community that comes from it, which you said some of that, but yeah, keep riffing on that.
Yeah, well, so first I do want to acknowledge that it has been a little bit of a struggle, as definitely a bit of a hipster about the shanties, and it's been a learning process to kind of share with other people who, like, my coworkers making fun of me. They were making fun of me in good spirits. It was done in a very friendly way, but it was also, it took a lot of like bravery to, share that with them. And that was a lot of vulnerability, and sometimes it was frustrating to see them like joking about something that's so important to me. And so to suddenly have those same people being like, oh my gosh, Jacky, have you listened to this new song where people are, they've rewritten this, beloved song to be about kitty cats? There were a few conversations with my therapist. I won't lie. Um, but it's been a good opportunity to have some personal growth as well as enjoy the rest of the community, growing into the hobby. So you asked about the community aspect of it. So these songs were used for, so we should actually cover the difference between, sea songs and sea shanties. So the song that everyone knows that made sea shanties part of the popular consciousness, aside from Drunken Sailor, is Soon May the Wellerman Come. And as much of the internet has learned in the space of a few months, that's not actually a proper sea shanty, because proper sea shanties were used to coordinate labor, whether it was hauling on the ropes to hoist the sails or to work the pumps that would pump out water from the hold of the ship, or to raise the anchor. All of these were back-breaking jobs on the ship, and singing would keep everyone in step, keep everyone hauling together, and they would also make the time pass a little faster. If you've ever sung like protest songs, maybe you can understand how singing can kind of lift spirits and relieve some of the stress and tension. If the weather is bad, if you're scared of counter-protesters or whatever, it can really lift your spirits. And I think that shanties do something similar. But sea songs like Soon May the Wellerman Come, they get lumped in together a lot of the time. So one way to distinguish between, real shanty nerds and casual shanty people is, whether they understand that distinction. With all that being said, faith is often about community. It's being with other people of your philosophy, your belief system, and celebrating your views together, recognizing your trials together. And shanties do something kind of similar. A lot of them talk about the trials of life on sea, doing this backbreaking labor, and talking about the joys of shore. So it's a similar format in some ways to spiritual music of the church, where people will sing about, the suffering here on earth and life hereafter. So that's a very high-minded comparison with the shanties that sing about the incredibly harsh conditions on the ship, and then the ladies and whiskey on shore. So a lot of church music doesn't necessarily speak to me because I'm not Christian. I don't identify as Christian. And so I have to look elsewhere for that kind of suffering now, better times later. And shanties, fill that.
There once was a ship that put to sea. The name of the ship was the Billy o' Tea. The winds blew harder, bowed it down. Blow me, bully boys, blow. Soon may the Wellerman come to bring us sugar and tea and rum. One day when the tonguing is done, we'll take our leave and go.
So you mentioned the Wellerman before, and I know you were going to share a little bit of the history of that song.
So the Wellerman is a song from the mid-19th century. It's actually a poem, I believe, and it tells the story of hunting for whales, which were often very troublesome for the crews. A lot of people would die. Crews were often out for like several years at a time trying to get enough resources from the whales that they were hunting to make it worth sailing back home. And so the song covers some of those struggles. It does it in a pretty like romanticized way, which I think is a big part of the appeal, that it romanticizes the adventure. There are other songs that talk more about the struggle in a more personal way. Basically talking about how you've been out for years, the conditions are terrible, you really just want to die, and even when you get back to port, you will have earned a tiny amount of money for this incredibly hard work. So
I'll sing you a song, a good song of the sea. Way Rio, I'll sing you a song if you'll sing it with me, and we're bound for the Rio Grande, and it's away Rio, away Rio. It's fare thee well, my pretty young girls, and we're bound for the Rio Grande. Oh, heave with a will, boys, oh, heave long and strong. Away Rio, oh, sing a good chorus, for 'tis a good song, and we're bound for the Rio Grande, and it's away Rio, away Rio. It's fare thee well, my pretty young girls, and we're bound for the Rio Grande.
Can you say more about the harmony aspect you mentioned earlier?
yeah, so sea shanties, when they were performed on the ships, they had a song leader who would sing the verses, often improvising the verses. So in that way, it shares a certain amount with like modern music where people are improvising the words, whether it's protest songs again, or like rap. A lot of sort of formulaic songs where you can insert whatever seems appropriate. Shanties share that DNA. And so you had the one song leader, and then the rest of the crew might join in and sing along on the chorus lines. So that helped them keep the time. Often the chorus is something like, heave away, haul away. And on the heave and haul, that's when you would do those actions. And so it keeps everybody in time. And the sailors are probably not harmonizing while they were doing these songs. They probably sounded very discordant. But modern recordings, they are free to come up with really awesome harmonies, and you get some great sound with like a nice like deep bass line, and then a couple of voices layered on top of it. And when you get that in your ears, you feel like you're in the middle of this singing group. You feel like you're surrounded by great singers. You really feel like you're a part of that moment in the in the bar or the performance or whatever. And you also get the imagery of being out on the sea. So it's really like a form of escapism. They were singing about life on shore, but a lot of the time we want to escape from our lives on the shore. We want to, run away to sea, become pirates, that kind of thing. So I really appreciate being able to feel like part of a community that clearly knows each other. At our local meetup, we often sing a lot of the same songs, and everybody comes to know the local version. So there are some songs where one person in the group does them pretty much every time, and if anyone else was to sing them, that would be a faux pas. Or if someone else tries to sing that song while the person is absent, if they try to do it any differently than that person, it throws the entire room off, because everybody is, trying to put the pauses in where the normal person puts the pauses in and not where the new person puts the pauses in. So it really, it feels like a rhythm of life, I guess, to have that kind of stability.
It makes me think of, it makes me think of a few things. It makes me think of, like, theater. It makes me think of improv and sort of the similarities of the musical improv scene, where, except that everything is really, like, planned and set. And just all these other aspects of community that I was a Rocky Horror person, so
Yeah.
and I didn't think I'd be connecting sea shanties to Rocky Horror today, but I see it as far as the lines that everybody always shouts, and like the gathering in a specific place to continue the same rituals and that sense of community. But yeah, I absolutely love those moments for sure, and I think too, like, being Unitarians, we have the things that always happen in every service, but there isn't a ton of, like, the ritual and the call and response that there is in like the more, like, Christian traditions, or the one, where it's like we do the mass every time, and we and all this stuff. So it's a bit more familiarity and shared experience, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I think the Rocky Horror comparison is actually a really great one. I think that it's, maybe more applicable than the, Protestant tradition Unitarian church service, because the Unitarian church service is very structured. I can go to the church here, I can go to the church in San Francisco, and I will find it very recognizable, even if they do their best to make them different. They're pretty similar in the end. But with Rocky Horror, there's a sense of unpredictability, I think, even though everyone knows how it goes. I think that there's a sense of, like, raucous, joyous energy that is really different from a lot of the environments that we, as, like, white humanist-y type people coming from a church that's ultimately related to Christianity, it has its roots in Christianity. That's not something that we experience in our church. Yeah, it's a way to let loose, but also in a very familiar way. So I think that that's a great comparison.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, it also makes me think of going to bars in Ireland, which when I took my trip to Ireland a few years back, there was this sense of going out to bars to hear music, and not just like, I want to hear this specific person, but just knowing, like, music will be there, and, like, people showing up to the songwriter circle, or to the musician circle, and like the community that happens from it. Yeah, and I mean, of course, like, shanties and Irish bar culture, like, that's probably a mostly straight line connection. Like,
Yeah, it is in our modern consciousness. We definitely put those two together. The local group here in Chicago meets in an Irish bar. A lot of the, popular renditions of sea songs have a lot of Irish influences. You'll often hear, like, fiddle and squeezebox in the arrangements, but they are not as uniformly, like, Irish, British Isles as we often tend to think of them as being. So a lot of the earliest shanties go back to Africa and were brought over with the slave labor. And so the same sort of way that you got field songs and spirituals and things like that, mining songs later in American history, you also got shanties. And they were definitely influenced by the culture of the British Isles, the songs of the British Isles, but it's definitely a melting pot. We talk a lot about the folk process in the folk community, where it's like this sort of organic evolution of things sort of breeding with each other and new songs coming out, new styles coming out. And shanties are an example of that. So, yeah, but they are often sung in Irish pubs because they've been so strongly adopted into that association.
Adieu, sweet, lovely Nancy, 10,000 times adieu. I am going around the ocean, love, to seek for something new. Come change your ring with me, dear girl, come change your ring with me, that it might be a token of true love while I am on the sea. There are tinkers, tailors, and shoemakers lie snoring fast asleep, while we poor souls on the ocean wide are plowing up the deep. Our officers commanded us, and them we must obey, expecting at every moment for to get cast away. But when the wars are all over, there'll be peace on every shore. We'll return to our wives and our families and the girls that we adore. We'll call for liquor merrily and spend our money free. And when our money it is all gone, we'll boldly go to sea.
All right, so we've talked a lot about the history of sea shanties and sort of how you connect with them on a community aspect. I want to hear a little bit about a moment you felt spiritually connected with a particular sea shanty.
Yeah, so a lot of them talk about how difficult life is, how much you want to look forward to some ineffable future. And one of the songs that really gives me life in that regard is called Adieu, Sweet Lovely Nancy. And it's a ballad, it's not actually a shanty, but it tells the story of a sailor who, you know, he's leaving his sweetheart on the land, he's saying goodbye to her, he's talking about all the trials that await them in the British Navy, and but he'll be thinking about her. And then at the end of the song, he basically says, we'll come back, we'll drink and visit our wives and sweethearts and anybody else that we feel like, we'll spend all our money, and when it's all gone, we'll go to sea again. And that really spoke to me. You know, we go through so much in our lives, and we hope for so much. We hope for so much that we can't ever reach. You know, the dream is always better than the reality. And when we reach that dream and realize that it's, you know, just the kind of muddy reality after all, you know, we start it all over again. We go back to the drawing board, we go back to sea, we go back to the officers who are just abusing us, and we try again. And that's just, it kind of speaks to the human experience for me. And I think that there's something about the longing for romance to work out that really speaks to me as well. It's a really tender song, but then at the end, there's sort of the admission of, like, we don't just come back to Nancy that we're singing this song to. We come back to whoever catches our fancy, and we spend our money, and then, you know, we go out and try again. And it speaks to the pain of, like, trying to do relationships and the relationship's not working out. So, yeah, I listened to that a lot in college. I've had most of my relationships have been long distance, and so, it was a song that I could reach for when I was missing my partner. But it was also, a little self-aware in terms of the likelihood that it wouldn't work out.
Yeah, as someone who's also been in long-distance relationships, I can imagine how, like, a sea shanty would be actually really comforting during that time, for sure.
There are so many where, you're going away, you're hoping for the best, you're hanging on to that love as something to keep you moving, but at the end of the day, is it really going to work out? Nobody really thinks so.
Yeah. And it's interesting what you said about sort of like the ebb and flow of life, and I actually really like the sea as a metaphor for just, going with the flow of life and whatnot. I think it was Barbara Brown Taylor that said life isn't we shouldn't compare life to like a train ride. Life is like you're on a sailboat. Like if there isn't like a clear path, you're constantly adjusting to the wind and just sort of steering yourself in different directions. There isn't a clear track.
Yeah, I think that really speaks to another aspect of shanties that is appealing, that they do kind of take them where the wind blows. It takes sailors where the wind blows them. The songs, some of them have plots and have stories, like Adieu, Sweet Lovely Nancy, but a lot of them are just verses to fill time while you lift the anchor, and that could take hours, and so you needed to be able to come up with hours worth of verses and, a ton of rhyming couplets, and nobody cares if, they're great, well-inspired couplets. It's passing the time together.
It's like a classier version of singing Wheels on the Bus.
When you hear about some of the stuff that gets sung in these songs, I think that the word classy might not be one that I would...
Well, okay, a more grown-up version.
Definitely
a more
grown-up.
Musically classy, content-wise not, version of Wheels on the Bus.
Yeah, Wheels on the Bus, 99 bottles of beer on the wall.
Yes.
And Army running chants. Those are all similar, like, we gotta pass the time, we gotta, keep the kids' brains entertained, because, our young men at sea, whether they're on the bus or on a boat on the open ocean, the only thing that's limiting them is how many other people there are around to hear them and scold them.
Yeah, I also really like what you said about like how it marks through the songs are both about the passing of time and the flow of things, and also like help pass the time when you're out there. It's all this like very, like, it just sort of feeds into each other in this really interesting way.
Yeah, and sometimes they could be used to kind of send a blunt message to the officers or the people in charge. So another song is called Strike the Bell, and it's about, so the chorus says, strike the bell, second mate, and let us go below. And the reason for that is that when sailors were on watch, if a storm came up and they didn't have the watch changed so that they could go below, they would have to stay on deck until the storm was over or until they could, change watches. And so if your watch was almost up, you would be looking at the hourglass, hoping that the bell would be struck so that you could be swapped out with the rest of the crew. And the song is really interesting because it goes around and lists all the stations on the ship. And so you can learn from that, but there's also the, nudging the officers, like, hey, our time is up, let us, let's ring the school bell, let's get out of here, kind of vibe to it. And like, I think anybody who's watched the clock at the end of the workday can understand the the intention of like, we just need it to hurry up so we can get out of here and get our free time. So
That's awesome. I am curious. I want to hear about like maybe one or two more songs that serve a certain purpose.
some of the songs were to commemorate like battles or historic or folk heroes. And those are ones that I kind of enjoy. There's some modern ones that people have written to commemorate, battles from the Napoleonic Wars or whatever. One of the ones that I like is about a battle between an American and a British ship. And I've actually seen references to it in several different books. I like sci-fi, and a couple of those books I've seen mention the Battle of the Shannon and the Chesapeake. And the song is just a pretty straightforward recounting, but with the sort of typical heroic hyperbole.
Oh, the Chesapeake so bold sailed from Boston, we've been told, for to take the British frigate neat and handy. Oh, the people in the port all came out to see the sport, and the bands were playing Yankee Doodle Dandy. Oh, the British frigate's name, which for the purpose came to cool the Yankee courage neat and handy. Oh, was the Shannon, Captain Brooke, all her men were hearts of oak, and at fightin' were allowed to be the dandy-o.
So people have been talking about commuting during the pandemic. Do you miss commuting to the office? And I actually really miss commuting because that's my practice time for listening to shanties, blasting them on the highway. Other people listen to like summer pop hits, and I listen to, crusty sailors singing about, ladies of the night. But it's such a good way to decompress after a stressful workday. So a lot of the time, these songs were working off frustrations that the crew had. They shared knowledge about, watch out for the ladies on shore because they'll rob you blind while you're sleeping. You think that they're being affectionate, but actually they're just after your money. And so decompressing after the workday, like, cruising down the highway singing about these these sort of encounters is a great way to blow off some steam. And another well-known sea song is Rolling Down to Old Maui. And it tells the story of, like, they've been out whaling for a long time, and they're ready to get back to Hawaii and relax a little bit. And this song has come under some fire more recently. It's a little bit passe now, I guess, because there are some questions of whether it's exotifying native Hawaiians and so on. It's important to realize that all sea shanties pretty much were pretty politically incorrect, so this is not necessarily different than the genre as a whole. Anyway, sidebar there, because it's pretty important to kind of call some of this stuff out so that
Absolutely.
We're not whitewashing the shanties as much as, we've often allowed them to be whitewashed. But, coming back from this really tough life where you've been facing huge storms with hail and freezing rain, snow, while you're out on the ocean and there's wind, and you're having to work, at the top of a mast, furling sails while being buffeted with these winds and snow and everything else. And so singing songs about that, I find it reminds me both of the, like, shared struggle throughout human history, and also how much worse people in history have had it, that, my frustrations with my office are pretty trivial by the time that you compare them.
I mean, okay, so I identify strongly with the rocking out to things in your car. Like, that is also one of my favorite ways to decompress and, like, connect. And it also, the specificity of sea shanties made me think of Do you know the musical Come From Away?
I think I've heard of it, but I'm not super up on musicals. They're
Okay.
not, you know.
So I feel like you would like it. It is all completely in the style of like the folk music of Newfoundland because it takes place in Gander, Newfoundland, the days after 9/11. And but like the whole out so the long story short of it is that a bunch of planes were diverted to this small town in Canada, and they like took care of these people who were on the planes and like built this sense of community. And there's like bar scenes where like they're singing like folk songs and jamming out, and it's just, and the whole show has this like drive to it. And there's like a whole verse, you know, singing about the welcome to the land where the weather tries to kill us, and we said we would not be killed. And that is just like, it's a similar sort of thing where you have this group of people singing in this, you know, folk tradition, although it's also musical theater. And you know, you find that sense of comfort in the weather.
Yeah, exactly. I think that there are a lot of sources for these existentially comforting songs. The struggle of like life is trying to kill us and we're gonna make it through anyway. It's a message of perseverance, and I think whether you get it from musicals or from shanties, it's speaking to the same human experience at the root.
Absolutely.
It's a damn tough life full of toil and strife we Wellerman undergo, and we don't give a damn when the gales are done how hard the winds did blow. We're a homeward bound from the Arctic grounds with a good ship taut and free, and we don't give a damn when we drink our rum with the girls of old Maui. Rolling down to old Maui, me boys, rolling down to old Maui. We're a homeward bound from the Arctic grounds, rolling down to old Maui.
So you mentioned earlier your experience of listening to sea shanties and realizing that they were singing about women and the exotification of women in the song you just mentioned. And I am curious, as someone who presents as female, how you experience singing or listening to these songs that are objectifying women.
Yeah, it's definitely something that has to be navigated, I think, and people have very different reactions to them. For me, I actually find it really helps my sense of gender to sing these songs. There's an active reclamation to sing these songs a lot of the time, and when you start looking for them, there are a lot of modern songs that people have written in response to this. You know, songs that talk about these, you know, mermaids that the sailors are lusting after. What do the mermaids think of the situation? Or the women on shore, what do they do when the sailors are at sea? And a lot of the time, you know, the answer is they get up to trouble. So there's a lot of joy to be found in seeking those out and finding those songs about those feminist songs that are still, you know, they're modern songs a lot of the time, but they're still kind of in that tradition. They're drawing on a lot of the tropes and imagery. With the historical stuff, there are definitely some songs that I avoid listening to because it's uncomfortable for me. I've come to realize that the feeling that I get sometimes is actually what people would call dysphoria. And so that can be difficult to navigate sometimes. So singing these songs about women being objectified from the male point of view lets me feel like I'm part of the group, one of the guys, which is something I've, you know, never been able to experience where I just get to be one of the guys. I have a lot of guy friends, but as soon as I enter the room, the dynamic is different. I play role-playing games, and my college role-playing group was all men other than me. And I heard stories about, after I left the group, that it became rather a sausage fest. And that my presence in the room prevented it from being a sausage fest. So to sing songs about sausage fests on ships gives me a way to access that world that I wouldn't normally have. And that feels good for my gender. It wouldn't feel good for everybody. It doesn't feel good with every song, but it's something that I can find joy in, where when I sing these songs, I don't have to feel like anybody is questioning my gender or my presence in this group of, men because I'm listening to it on my headphones or whatever. I and the group of men in my ears get to be a single group. And I find that really centering. A lot of the time it sort of puts me back in my body. Whereas some of the other songs, for example, there's a whole set of folk songs about women who dress as men to get on board the ship, often as cabin boys, because cabin boys were literally, young boys. And so the women could dress up as a boy, and they would get pregnant in these songs. These songs are sort of fantasies about the cabin boy getting pregnant and giving birth on the ship. And that I find really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because it really, for me, it highlights the precariousness of being the one woman in a group of men. But when the group of men in the story is just men, then it's more like I get to be one of the men, as opposed to the one outsider in a precarious position.
There's a lot of things in that resonate. I think anybody in any women or people who have been in the sausage fest, especially amongst nerd culture, because nerd culture can be a sausage fest, will identify with that for sure. And yeah, there is a sense of like you wanting to be one of the guys, wanting to be included, and things just shifting like that. And yeah, I can see how that connection happens.
And there's also the act of rebellion of being, someone who presents as a woman and singing songs about pursuing the women on shore. There's an act of rebellion against the standard expectations with that as well, I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm curious about these feminist callback songs. Do you have any examples of those?
I'm not sure that I have any that are in the public domain, since they tend to be modern songs. But one example that I know is the song of a woman who dressed up, ran away to sea. She ended up being a soldier later on, and she actually has a Wikipedia page. She's, I think, a little bit of a folk hero. I think that her story has been a little exaggerated, but she is quite an adventure hero, and I find that really inspiring. It's called When I Was a Fair Maid, and this song just sort of tells the story of her shipping out, coming back to land and being outed by someone who falls in love with her, thinking that she's a man. And I find that resonates. I don't generally dress to pass myself as a man. I think that it's been very rare that something other than computers misgenders me. Although I have really enjoyed the times that computers have misgendered me. My work's HR system actually had me tagged as male in the system after I was hired, and I had to ask them to correct that. And for a long time, Google thought that I was a man who was 5 years older than my actual age, which was really interesting because Google has access to a ton of information, and this was back before Google Plus, and once I signed up for Google Plus, it knew that I marked the female box on my account, but before then it thought that I was male, and I think that just always really stood out to me, of like, Google knows all, and Google thinks I'm a man who's older than I actually am. There's something going on with that.
Oh no! Did you get was it just a back end thing, or did you get any ads or?
I generally turn off personalized ads, and also, since that demographic is extremely hard to market to, they tend not to find things to market to me that are applicable. So
well,
I get
an advantage.
Yeah, exactly. One place that I worked, the marketing guy told me that I was a marketer's worst nightmare, because I'm a woman who likes Star Trek and sea shanties and doesn't click on ads and turns off ad personalization. No one knows how to market to me.
I think you just I think only the cool people are going to market to you. I mean, come on now.
I mean,
there's definitely a niche for that.
Yeah. It definitely makes it easier to filter out ads that are uninteresting to me, because, either they're Renaissance Fair ads or Star Trek ads, or they're, wedding rings or something that are not at all applicable.
Just in case, we're just gonna check.
Yeah, I get so many ads for gay underwear now, and they can't figure out how to market anything else to me other than futuristic women's sanitary products and gay underwear. I'm being serious. I'm so tired of seeing both of these ads for every single company that produces these products. Please sell me Star Trek again. You used to do that, and I would like to be sold Star Trek.
When I was a fair maid about 17, I listed in the Navy for to serve the Queen. I listed in the Navy, a sailor lad to stand, to hear the cannons rattling and the music so grand, and the music so grand, the music so grand, to hear the cannons rattling and the music so grand. So fare thee well, my captain, you've been so kind to me, and likewise my shipmates, I'm sorry to part with thee. But if ever the Navy needs a lad, a sailor I'll remain. I'll put off my cap and feathers, and I'll run the rigging again. I'll run the rigging again. I'll run the rigging again. I'll put off my cap and feathers, and I'll run the rigging again.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question that I ask every time. And that is, where does inspiration live in your body? And this can be both when you are listening to something that is resonating, and also when you have a moment, a thought of inspiration, something that you want to create. So this is both input and output.
Yeah, I think that since I work in a creative field doing design work, it's not as creative as producing my own music or doing fine art, but it is creative in that I have to have mental pictures in my head and then put them onto the screen. That tends to be a fairly cerebral process for me, so it tends not to strike as an emotional feeling a lot of the time, but when I feel inspiration in a more general sense outside of that creative work, I definitely feel it sort of in my chest, in my heart. It feels like I'm connected with something bigger, and it is very similar to the feeling that I get when I listen to a song with some really good harmony right in my ears, and the bass voice has a great harmony line. I get the same sense of connection in my chest, and feeling like I'm one of a larger organization, a larger group of entities.
Nice. Very cool, very cool.
Yeah.
it's interesting now that I've asked people and have some data. The chest keeps coming up a lot, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, well, I think that there's a good reason that we think of our heart as being a key organ in the emotional creative process.
Oh, for sure. And I will share, for me, it especially on certain pieces of music, it's like a chills thing. It's like either back of the neck or like the legs. Like some songs specifically back of the leg. Don't know why. But it's just really interesting. So before we wrap up, do you have any other thoughts or tangents about sea shanties that you would like to share? Any other good stories?
Well, I pride myself on being outside of the normal boxes that people tend to want to put me in. The list of interests that I named off is, maybe not a totally mainstream set. And I really enjoy the way that a lot of people who kind of get to know me do so in very specific circumstances, whether it's at work or at church or at a set of parties with a specific group of people. And they tend to have a lot of assumptions about what kind of person I am. I'm from the Midwest. I internally, I don't identify as like super Midwestern, but I think that I probably have habits in the way that I talk and present myself that come across as very Midwestern. And so when people find out that I am really into shanties and that there are a lot of like really quite dirty shanties that are out there, that some of which I know, it really throws them for a loop that this person who tends to reserve swearing for only very special circumstances would be, singing dirty songs on the weekend. And I really appreciate that surprise that I can give to people. I hope that they appreciate being surprised as much as I enjoy doing it to them.
That's awesome. And I mean, I absolutely hear that and identify that. I think there is a certain expectation, like especially with when we say like, oh, I go to church, and then you have to clarify, oh no, I'm Unitarian.
Yeah, we sing shanties in church. There was that time that I sang a shanty in church.
Yep, exactly. And so everyone has this like, there's a lot of boxes people try to put us in, and it is definitely fun to be like, that's not what I'm about.
That's right, yeah. So many assumptions based on the way we present ourselves, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. All right. So, Jacky, where can people connect with you online?
Yeah, I am on Twitter. I post my ship posts on Twitter.
That's ship
with
posts,
a P.
With a P.
Yes. So my Twitter is just Jacky Decks.
Well, this has been a really great conversation. It was great getting to really dive deep with you on sea shanties, and I'm excited for people to hear it.
Yeah, thank you so much for interviewing me.
Thank you for being on the show. First time in person!
Woo!
Thank you for listening to Faith and What Resonates. The theme music for the show is an original composition called My Journey, My Song, the first song I wrote when I was 19. Faith and What Resonates is part of the New Faith New Media Network. You can discuss this and future episodes in the New Faith New Media Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/NFNM group. You can also follow us on social media, and those links are in the show notes. We have several other shows, including A Pastor and a Priest Walk into a Movie Theater, and you can access all of these shows by subscribing to New Faith New Media wherever you get your podcast. You can also support the New Faith New Media Network on Patreon. All Patreon supporters get access to our Patreon exclusive podcast, Blessed Lunatics, where the founding members of the New Faith New Media explore the divine through laughter, which means we usually drink and share stories and make jokes about our different faith backgrounds. Actually, there's an episode where I share the backstory of this song you're hearing right now. Finally, if you want to know more about my music, you can head to my website, gailgallaghermusic.com. Thanks for listening, and remember to stay curious and keep following the magic of the things that resonate.
New Faith, New Media.
Theology.
Nerdery.
Community.